Option A says the difference between the Romans and Celts lies in the style of making artifacts, as the same marks the difference between the different time periods of the same culture. Now, this is limited. It covers, let's say, two of the three major arguments. The difference between the Roman and Celtic cultures is in style, the style of making artifacts. So yes, that's a valid point. The same marks the difference between the different time periods. This is a reference to the last two statements of the passage. So that is also true. In the same culture, of the same culture, yes, that is what we get from Roman art of the 4th century BC is different from Roman art of the 4th century AD. And the same is true of the Celts. So we find that these two aspects are covered, but there are marked similarities between the two cultures, which we see in the types of objects they made and the materials they used. So this first part, about 3 to 4 lines, 3.5 lines, is omitted from this option. So option A is quite limited. Hence, A can be eliminated. Option B says the artifacts made by the Romans were similar to those made by the Celts. As they both dealt with similar objects and materials, the styles, on the other hand, are different. So this is decent enough. It talks about the similarities between the Roman and the Celtic culture. They both dealt with similar objects and materials. The styles, on the other hand, are different. So the difference was in the style. So this covers, again, two of the three key aspects. It omits the aspect of differences between different timelines or time periods of the same culture. So that is one aspect that we see compared to option A, B loses out. But maybe this is the only option that is valid. So we might be able to eliminate the other options, in which case we'll have to select option B. Let's look at the other options. C tells us the artifacts of Roman and Celtic cultures are significantly different from each other in terms of stylistic aspects, but not in terms of artifact types or materials used. So this is very close to option B. We do find that option B is slightly better than this. And that is because, one, there is a slight assumption in the word significantly. Option B says the styles, on the other hand, are different, which is very close to this statement here. The difference is about style. The passage doesn't quite say that there is significant difference, but then significant can actually be inferred from the last statement. Despite that, there should not be room for inference in a summary question. Then again, the more marked problem with option C is that it changes the order of the subjects or the arguments, different from each other in terms of stylistic aspects, but not in terms of artifact types or materials used. In the passage, we have artifact types or materials used, points of similarity mentioned at the beginning of the passage. Then later comes the aspect of the actual difference, which is in the style. B gets this right. It talks about the similarities first, and then it talks about the differences. So while very close between option B and C, B is the better choice. So C can be eliminated. Option D says the differentiating factor in between art forms of various cultures and various timelines of the same culture lies not in the use of material or relic types, but in stylistic rendition. Now, we come to an impasse because both of these options seem close, but what is the difference between the two? Option B omits the aspect of similar timelines or different timelines of the same culture, as we see from the last 3 lines of the passage. So that's quite a sizable chunk. We had noticed how option A had included this particular aspect because it is one of the 3 key points or the 3 key arguments, major arguments made in the passage. Then why is D inferior, or what does D omit? D doesn't mention the Roman and Celtic cultures or Roman and Celtic art. It says between art forms of various cultures. So which one should we choose? The ideal thing between B and D, that is, the ideal thing to do is to choose D, because what we have in D is still represented art forms of various cultures. So it doesn't specifically talk about the two art cultures, the two art forms of the cultures mentioned in the passage, which is the Roman and Celtic art. But we can see Roman and Celtic art represented in the phrase between art forms and various cultures. Notice that we don't need to infer this. If we call art forms of various cultures a universal set, then Roman and Celtic art would be two circles or two set representations within that universal set. But if you look at B, then the styles on the other hand were different, etc. What we see is that this particular aspect of various timelines of the same culture, that has been omitted. So what actually is omitted is worth about 2.5 lines or two statements of the passage. So which one omits more with the same length of the two options? We realize that it is D, which is closer to the passage. So none of these options are perfect, but D is closer as compared to B. So in retrospect, we can eliminate B, we can qualify D. So that is the correct answer choice.